Dia Gwit everyone, Kajima Tashiv, and welcome back to episode number 53 of the Inline G Flute podcast with me, your host, motherfucking Inline G. Lads, I've guessed this is episode number 53. If it's not, don't panic, don't adjust your televisions, that's my fault, alright? My boo-boo, I fucked it. I have batch recorded a load of episodes, and I'm getting as many of them into the crypt ahead of America and the NFA convention in a few weeks, so fuck knows what number this actually is. Maybe I'm in America right now. Maybe you've seen me on Instagram drinking and driving with a Bud Light Lime and Raisin Cane sauce all over my fucking face. Or maybe I've gambled my gold flute in a card game in Vegas and I'm drying my sorrows in a dive bar with some bourbon and 10-cent chicken wings. You can see... Truth be told, I don't know what the fuck goes on in America, guys. I don't know what you do over there. I'm so excited to find out. I put up on Instagram the other day all the things I wanted to get in America, and I was like, Bud Light Lime? Really? I was like, you just don't understand. Bud Light Lime is for the European palate. But here, lads, today's episode, it's another rabbit hole. It's another great one. It's what I love. It's what I love. It's Wikipedia holes and Googling late into the night, pulling on a thread in my brain that's been sticking out for years, like my cheap fake football jerseys. And I've been pulling on them. And this one is namely classical music. Is it also, or can it also be, punk rock? Now, that's a very classic FM thing to say. And unlike our friends over there, I won't be watering this down. I know you guys can take a food shot. So, I haven't got an answer yet. Is classical music punk rock? I don't know. I'm on the fence about it. And even regarding the more controversial composers, I'm still on the fence. But I fucking love punk. So this is a deep, deep hole I've been down. There's a euphemism in there, but I'm not going to make it because I'm better than that. Alright? Now, I'm going to hold your hand and bring you down this deep, deep, deep hole with me. Now, what is punk? First of all, we're going to have to make the very clear distinction between what punk rock is as a cultural phenomenon and punk rock as a music genre. Because I'm pretty sure when I say punk rock, what do you think of? Torn leather jackets, mohawks, Doc Marten boots. And here, you wouldn't be wrong thinking of that. Because the punk rock music genre is what we associate most with punk rock itself. Fucking obviously. There is a wee bit of a debate. This is very important. There's a wee bit of a debate about who was the first true punk band. For various reasons. But one of the most accepted, they definitely are a punk band and they were definitely early, so we'll use it for the sake of this podcast, would be the Ramones. The Ramones were founded in 1974 in New York. They all had the surname Ramone, but they weren't related. This was just a stage name. It was actually borrowed from the fact that Paul McCartney, when he used to check into hotels when he was very famous, he called himself Paul Ramon, which they added an E to and made Ramone. Which is very fucking cool. Paul McCartney's popping up a lot in these podcasts now, isn't he? Is that 3 weeks in a row? The Beatles have been mentioned in this podcast. I love the Beatles, man. Oh, has anyone watched that documentary in Disney, by the way? It's like fucking 8 hours long, 2-hour episodes, where it's just the Beatles sitting in a room writing songs together. Perfect example of the creative process and what creative flow looks like. It's fucking fascinating. It is brilliant. But anyway, back to it. Now, punk rock music style. It was exactly that. It was a classic lineup. It was a rock lineup of one guitar, maybe 2 guitars, a bass guitar, drums, and vocals. It was fast, it was high energy, it was messy as fuck, and the lyrics, very importantly, were anti-establishment and or anti-authoritarian. So over the pond, over the big beautiful pond, over to England, you have the Sex Pistols. Also a punk band with Sid Vicious and Johnny Rotten leading the punk revolution back home. Back home, Jesus, fuck, that was a slip of the tongue. Oh God, Gareth, it's not back home. There was Irish punk bands, we'll get to it in a minute, but England is not back home. I mean this side of the river, you know what I mean, fuck. Irish passport revoked. So, anyway, the Sex Pistols are knocking about in England, and similar vibes. They were singing a lot of anti-monarchy songs as well. A good example of that is God Save the Queen. They have a song called God Save the Queen. It's not what you think it is. It's very, very anti-authoritarian. So, the Sex Pistols and the Ramones, very similar stylistically. And that style started to spread, especially to places where the youth felt angry at the system, because that was so important to the punk movement, was anger at establishment or authoritarianism. And where there is anger, punk music was one of the first ways to truly express that with this high energy, angry lyrics. It was great. Now, where did it spread to? The obvious place at that time in the 1970s, around that area, Belfast. Now, in Belfast, you had Terry Hooley, a guy who ran a record shop called Good Vibrations. record shop slash DIY record label. He printed a few vinyls himself for people, but very, very DIY. Now, Terry Hooley was knocking about at this time, and he found a wee band. They came down from Derry, and they were called The Undertones. Now, if anyone's not familiar with The Undertones, fuck me. The Undertones, the greatest, in my opinion, the greatest punk band of all time. They had a huge hit called Teenage Kicks. I'm sure you're all familiar with Teenage Kicks, which to this day is still my favourite song of all time. Do you know, by the way, it's the only ever song, this might be true, or this might be one of those things I've heard in a pub, and I'm just saying it out loud again, but fuck it, it's my podcast, I'll do what I want. I think it is the only time a song has ever been played twice in a row on BBC Radio. John Peel, the DJ, played it back then, and it finished like 2.5 minutes long. Most punk songs are. He's like, that was so good, we'll play it again. Again, don't let the truth get in the way of a good story. Also, on Disney Plus, there's a movie called Good Vibrations documenting Terry Hooley and his life and discovering the Undertones and all that went on in Belfast. It is fucking great. I'd highly recommend it. But Belfast was, at the time, at the peak of the Civil War, or the Troubles as we know it, in the 70s. And basically every bit of live music in the country stopped dead because they were afraid of getting bombed or shot or raided by the paramilitaries or the British Army. So Belfast city centre past 5 p.m. was a ghost town. And the young people were getting fed up of it. So it started this huge punk scene in Belfast. That was, generally speaking, the only gigs, the only live music you could get in the city in the 70s was punk. And it was also one of the few places where famously it never discriminated, the punk scene, between Protestants or Catholics or the divide in the war or nationalists and unionists. None of that. Everyone was welcomed into the culture. If you hated the establishment, you were in. That was it. Mr. Hooley, Terry Hooley, even famously said once, when it comes to punk, New York has the haircuts, London has the trousers, Belfast has the reason. So, that's punk at its basic level, punk music. But it's not just a musical style. Punk is also a cultural phenomenon most famous for its attitude. So, punk rock attitude. Don't take my word for this, okay? Instead, let's look to the modern day daddy of rock and roll, Jack Black. In School of Rock, one of my favourite films of all fucking time. Me and my brother still watch it every Christmas day after dinner, and we play the drinking game. Fucking great. The bit where they say, kick some ass! We always have a shot and then we're way back to bed. It's great. Anyway, there's a scene in School of Rock where all the kids come to pick up Jack Black's character. He's been sacked from the school, but they want to play Battle of the Bands anyway. They wake him up in bed, and they've secretly hired a bus to take them all to the show. And he looks out the window to see the bus because he doesn't believe them. And he realises it's true, and he goes, no way, that is so punk rock. That's it. It's a bunch of kids on a school bus. Is it the same thing as the Ramones? No, of course not. But it proves punk is an attitude. Punk rock is an attitude. Punk music itself stemmed from resistance. The early 60s and 70s saw a lot of like prog rock bands, progressive rock bands like Pink Floyd and Yes. I personally think they're not bad as bands. They don't half fucking go on a bit, like Jesus Christ. Some of the songs are like, some of Yes songs are like fucking 20 minutes long. But punks found it to be too long, self-indulgent, and not true rock. To be honest, by the end of like the 60s and 70s, you were starting to get Simon and Garfunkel being referred to as rock. Which, to be honest, that's a load of bollocks. I love Simon and Garfunkel, but they're not rock. So that was the rock and roll aesthetic. They took the rock and roll aesthetic and wanted to be more rock, but they had shorter songs, no elaborate guitar solos, no attempt to look sexy, and no care for what anyone else thinks, especially those in power. And that's what the punk attitude really is. That's what punk is at its core. It is telling the man to go fuck himself. It's anti-authority, anti-establishment, and doing it all in a DIY as fuck fashion. So I'm going to give you some attitudes of a punk rock attitude before we get to classical music. We will get there, don't worry. I hope you're still in with me. Hope you're still listening. Hold on, we're nearly there. Now, first of all, I've probably said it in this podcast, I love saying the phrase, that's so punk rock. And I've been racking my brain trying to think of all the times I've done that recently so I can use it. Now, music-wise, I think disco music, so punk rock. Disco music is punk rock as fuck because it was started in New York in the 60s and 70s when being gay / queer was illegal. It was actually illegal for two fellas to dance together in New York in the 60s. Fucking hell. And being black or Latino, it may as well have been illegal. It wasn't, but it may as well have been. So all these people went to underground hidden clubs, usually ran by the mafia because they're the only people that were willing to take it on. And they fused Cuban percussion, African rhythms, blues expression, and lyrics about how to have a good fucking time and make a party. And that made a musical genre that was essentially telling the man to go fuck himself. It's gay liberation music disco. You only have to check out the history of the Stonewall riots. We don't say Stonewall riots, so that's the common colloquial term, but we don't say Stonewall riots, we say Stonewall uprising. But you'll see how punk rock, the attitude of disco music was. Hip-hop music is punk rock as fuck. NWA singing Fuck the Police is pure punk rock. My favourite example of this is a group from Belfast, a hip-hop trio called Kneecap. They're called Kneecap because the style of shootings that you get in Belfast from the paramilitaries, if you're caught drug dealing or you're caught doing something bad in Belfast, you're shot in the kneecaps. It's very well known. So they call themselves Kneecap after this, and they sing uniquely, well, not uniquely, 90% in Irish. Not Gaelic. We don't say the word Gaelic. I've said this before in this podcast. It's not called Gaelic. We call it Irish. Gaelic is the English word for Galga. We say Irish. You don't speak Gaelic. Gaelic's a culture. You speak Gaelga if you want to speak it in Irish, or you speak Irish. Anyway, they not only sing about their oppression to, or their opposition to the British government, they also sing about the fucking state of the mental health crisis going on in the United Kingdom at the minute, and they boycott anything that is linked or is directly funding the Israeli government, regardless of how hard it hits their wallets. They've been banned by BBC, they've been banned by RTE, but that doesn't stop them going on Jimmy Fallon, and they made a movie actually recently. It's just about to come out with Michael Fassbender. It won Best Movie at Sundance. That's punk rock as fuck. They're proper anti-establishment. They don't give a fuck what anyone thinks. They sing about their lives. They do what the fuck they want. And they do it all in Irish. They made Irish cool again. So, I cannot express how important this is. Punk is not just being a wee bit of a bad boy. Punk is a strong political belief. You've really got to commit to it. For example, saying, I don't like the Beatles. That's not punk. Preferring Pepsi over Cola. That's not punk. Being a vegan. That's not punk. I'm sorry. You have to go against the entire establishment. And this is where we're going to talk about classical music. Classical music sits somewhere in the middle. There are a few punks, more or less, but there's a few softy bollock spoofers. There's a few fucking grifters there. And we're going to find out all about that after this short advertisement. It's not really an advertisement. It's you guys. So, the Inline G podcast is free and always will be free. That's a fucking guarantee, baby. It's fully DIY. It isn't afraid of the establishment or authority, and therefore sponsors aren't always mad about coming on this podcast. They're not delighted about the fact. You might even say it's punk rock as fuck, and punks need paid too. So if you want to donate to the podcast, you can now do so through the Patreon. Audio listeners, it is patreon.com/the Inline G Flute podcast, and it's written down here for the video watchers. It costs €5 a month, whatever that is in your currency. You're given a fair exchange rate. It's all grand. It's a Patreon or a worldwide company, so it's all fine. And with that, you're keeping this podcast alive. You get 4 episodes of this podcast every fucking month, come rain or shine. We are 53 weeks in, 53 episodes. I will always be here on a Friday, turning it up and giving you an episode. If you listen to every episode, if it gives you a bit of solace, a bit of distraction, a bit of entertainment in your life, please consider paying me for that work. Now, it costs €5 a month. That's less than the price of a pint these days. My idea was to do the price of a pint, but it's less than the price of a pint these days. And if you saw me in the pub and you thought, right, I listen to all 4 episodes a month, I'll buy Gareth a pint to say thank you. Do it virtually. I do everything around here: marketing, graphic design, audio production, video production, scripts, etc., etc. To travel, to meet the famous players. Having a Patreon for this podcast generates a regular income so I can turn down other work. It's a fucking delight. It also lets me travel and meet the best flute players in the world and dedicate more time to research and punk rock, which I fucking love. You'll also get your episodes a little bit earlier if you're in the Patreon. You get the odd little surprise for you. Patreon's got their trading cards recently. You'll be getting more stuff to do with merch as well. I would do everything I can to make sure you guys get a little bit of something to say thank you for it all. So, if you can afford it, please go and sign up at patreon.com/the Inline G Flute podcast. You can unsubscribe at any time. No cost. It'll just hit unsubscribe. You'll run the month out without paying anything ever again. That's it. You're done. And you can jump back in whenever you want. I do it all the time with other podcasts. If you can afford it, it means so much. It is keeping this podcast alive. If you can't afford it though, maybe you're unemployed, maybe times are a bit hard, there is a cost of living crisis at the minute, that's grand. Don't worry about it. The people who are paying for you to listen for free. You all get the same podcast, you all get the same content. It's a lovely model. So, thank you very much. Classical music. What's not punk about it? So, Classic FM. My fucking bane of my existence, man. I know I try not to shit on Classic FM, but some of it is absolute horse shit, what they post on there. It is basically the Daily Mail. I don't know what the American equivalent of that. The American equivalent of that is, American media equivalent of the Daily Mail is America. No, it's Fox News. Is that? No, it's not that bad. Anyway, but Classic FM posted an article a few years ago called Classical Music Punks, which now I've been unable to find. It seems to have been deleted from the internet, which is very apt because Classic FM couldn't be further away from punk if it fucking tried. Classic FM is an incredibly well-funded station that features almost exclusively middle-class English presenters talking about the world's biggest orchestras. It is the very definition of the establishment. Now, I have no hate for them. I think Classic FM does actually do some good stuff sometimes. It's definitely getting people in through the door. It's an entry point for a lot of people, but nobody there is qualified to talk about punk. Sometimes they go down market, Classic FM, they get a wee TV personality or someone from one of the other home nations to appeal to the working classes. So instead of English, they'll get a wee Scot in or an Irish one or a Welshman. But, for example, multi-millionaire TV personality Myleene Klass or your token posh Scottish person isn't exactly what working class people are looking for. So, fuck them. But the list itself was also exactly why I hate saying classical music is punk rock. Because so many marketing teams use this in big orchestras and they're a bunch of fucking dweebs, man. You fucking losers. You're trying to give classical music an exciting appeal, but by being a fucking loser and a dweeb and posh and part of a big establishment, you're absolutely killing it. You're having the opposite effect. So there's two big things you're forgetting. First of all, for example, comparing Beethoven's 8th Symphony, which I saw on the internet, to punk rock, it draws images in your heads of saying it's punk rock makes you think of the Sex Pistols or the Ramones. But a Sex Pistols song lasts 2 minutes. And Beethoven's 8th, apart from being the worst Beethoven symphony in my opinion, is like 40 fucking minutes or something, right? If you've never seen classical music before, you'll be on Instagram halfway through the first movement. You'll be fucking bored to tears because you'll think, oh yeah, punk rock, that sounds great. 40 minutes later, you're like, Jesus Christ, shoot me. Second, this music still exists in big, fancy concert halls where everyone is dressed up like fucking penguins at a wedding and the great and good of upper society are covering the fucking place like a rash. This is the definition of the establishment. So fuck those guys. So sorry guys, no. Beethoven's 8th Symphony is not punk rock. Having an orchestra wear black shirts instead of white is not punk rock. Serving champagne at the interval instead of a lovely pint of Guinness is not punk rock. These are normally the most cringy, out of touch comparisons that are exactly what drive young people away from classical music. This is the fucking death of it. It looks so fucking lame. It's like those lads that used to come to school when you were wee. They used to come to school and rap about smoking not being cool. Like, smoking is cool, right? We all know smoking's cool. Don't try to tell me smoking's not cool. Smoking is fucking cool. It's bad for you. That's why you shouldn't do it. But to say smoking's not cool, fuck off. It is. We all know it is. We accepted this long ago. Like, classical music marketing wants you to believe it's punk to give an appeal to the youth. And it's having the opposite effect. So, where do classical music and punk actually share some similarities? Well, for you, dear listener, for dear Patreon, or not Patreons, everyone. Fuck. There's no secret Patreon episodes, I promise. That sounded like it was fucking... I've misrecorded that. No, it's for you. It's for all of you. This is punk rock, this podcast. You're all getting it. So for you guys, for you lovely, lovely people, I have picked out 3 people who, for various reasons, in my mind, represent the punk ethos. I don't know if any of them are truly punk, to be honest, and this is as close as I found for now. Now, this isn't your diluted, PG, out of touch attempt to link classical music to something cooler. There will be themes in the rest of this podcast you might find upsetting, but they're cool as fuck. So my first person, which it came straight to my mind when I thought of who is punk rock as fucking classical music, Franz Liszt, the composer. Now, I fucking love Liszt. I absolutely adore Liszt. One of my favorite composers. And I think a lot of classical musicians can relate to this, but my teenage rebellious years, apart from listening to the Enter Sky and drinking Buckfast in the field, were also spent a lot to listening to the music of Franz Liszt. Because his music is not only hard as fuck, it's so difficult, it's so virtuosic, that gives it kind of like a punk aesthetic just for being so fucking in your face, but it's also loud. It's really loud. And it's virtuosic as it can be. The only justification Liszt uses, especially in his early compositions, for composing something, the only reason he does it is just seems to be, I can do this and nobody else can, so I'm going to. And it's class. So for those unaware, Franz Liszt was a composer slash pianist who was knocking around in the 1800s. He was born in a wee village called Deborian in Hungary slash Austria. Those days it was Hungary. These days it's Austria. We'll not get into that. I've had a couple of wee arguments over there about that. So Liszt actually didn't speak Hungarian, but he loved Hungarian folk music. And he's arguably the greatest piano player or pianist of all time. And he fucking knew it. So here's some reasons why I think Franz Liszt embodies the punk ideologies. He reinvented classical music performing. Now, I really mean that. The word recital itself was coined by Liszt. Now, he was the first ever piano player to turn the piano to its side so the audience could see the performer as well. Up until then, it wasn't done like that. And nowadays, it's such a common thing. It's part of our commonplace practice. We can't believe it never was done like that. Not done like that. He even had multiple pianos on stage. So he used to have one on the left and one on the right, sometimes one in the middle as well. And for different pieces, he would go over to different pianos just so the audience could all get a nice big look at him. Fucking class, isn't it? Listomania. That's the next reason. Now, you've heard the term Beatlemania, probably, I hope, in the 60s. It was this obsession and this craze about the Beatles where, like, we girls would go to the concert. Girls would go to the concert and literally fucking scream for the entire concert. Have you ever watched that video with them playing at, what do you call the baseball park? Is it Stanley Park they're playing at? It's like one of the last ever live, I think it's the last live gig they did, apart from the rooftop gig years later. You can't hear a thing. They scream bloody murder the whole way through the concert. It was insane. That term Beatlemania derives from Listomania, which was coined at the time. It was a term used at the time when Liszt was on tour as a piano player around Europe, playing towns and cities all across the fucking place. But unlike when we use it for the Beatles, and when we use it generally these days, we use the word mania, it means essentially like it's in fashion, or people are really hyped about it, it's intensely popular. At that time, at the time of Liszt, it was literally the word they used for an actual fever, like a mental illness or fever or something properly wrong with you. So when he played smaller towns, Liszt, when he was on tours, physicians afterwards often asked and had calls to attempt to immunize people that went to the concerts, to give them fucking vaccinations against Listomania because they had actual physical symptoms. Basically, after all the concerts he played, a lot of the audience would leave and for the following days would feel very unwell after his gigs. Unwell. When I say they, I mean the almost exclusively female audience that came to see him. Because women actually fucking screamed as well throughout his gigs at him. Now, that was a shock in the Beatles time we saw people doing that. Imagine in the 1800s, women especially, screaming during a classical music concert. That's unbelievable. Now, the guy that coined the term, Heinrich Heine, this is what he had to say about it. So he said, what is the reason of this phenomenon? The solution of this question belongs to the domain of pathology rather than that of aesthetics. A physician whose speciality is female diseases and whom I asked to explain the magic our Liszt exerted upon the public smiled in the strangest manner and at the same time said all sorts of things about magnetism, galvanism, electricity, of the contagion of the close hall filled with countless wax lights and several hundred perfumed and perspiring human beings, of historical epilepsy, of the phenomenon of tickling, of musical cantorides, and other scarbarous things, which I believe have reference to the mysteries of the Bona Dea. Now, the Bona Dea, by the way, Bona Dea was the Roman goddess of chastity and fertility. All that this guy is saying, because I couldn't confirm this, but I bet my fucking bottom dollar the physician he was talking to, who was a specialist on female diseases, was a guy. Obviously, he was a man. And I think when I'm reading this, the idea I get was basically all that happened at Liszt concerts was a load of girls went along, got horny as fuck at seeing big sexy Liszt back in the 1800s, and because women's sexuality wasn't invented yet, they assumed magnets were making them all sick, when actually all they wanted was to ride Liszt. And who could blame them? Liszt was a very handsome man as well. He was a proper rock star. Like during concerts, women used to like sneak up when he had his coffee on stage, and if he had a little bit left, they would take it and pour it into a personal vial and hang it around their necks, no matter how bad it fucking stunk, for as long as they could. That was how crazy it was. Some of them even used to smoke on stage. Again, cool as fuck. He used to smoke on stage, and when he left the bottom of his cigar, women would take them and put it in between their tits and their cleavage. Man, that is punk rock as fuck. And like Franz Liszt, he got about a bit. He was riding half of Europe at this time. Like everywhere he went, he was riding all around him. And why not, mate? Fill your boots, big son. That's what punk rock's all about. Enjoy yourself. And the last reason why Liszt was very punk rock, he was actually very charitable, believe it or not. So he believed artists served a purpose to the public. almost a duty, and he often donated much of his huge financial earnings to charity. He gave free lessons and masterclasses all the fucking time, donated to victims of various tragedies, basically gave away every penny he earned. He was also a Saint-Simonist, or a Saint-Simonist, which was a philosophy at the time, almost like a cult, semi-religious kind of weird thing, that specifically championed women's autonomy and the redistribution of wealth, which is punk rock as fuck. So for those reasons, I'm putting Franz Liszt down as punk as fuck. But the only slight deviation from punk was the nature of classical music. It was still a fancy art form, okay? There wasn't much other music at the time, but it was either you went to see your local folk band play in the pub for free, or you could afford to go to classical music. That was the two types of music at the time. And Liszt was part of that world. He was very much part of that upper class society. Now, this is the common issue throughout classical music and being punk rock, and I haven't seen many famous classical musicians truly go against it. So perhaps this is a case of evolution and not revolution, but I haven't worked it out yet. So my next classical music punk, a proper fucking punk, is a German composer and serial polyamorist, Karl-Heinz Stockhausen. Now, Stockhausen was a revered composer, mega famous, who experimented a lot with electronic compositions and new music. Really weird shit. So he was born in 1928 and he only died there in 2007. So like recently. Now, a couple of things about Stockhausen make him quite punk rock. Firstly, his actual compositions, his musical style of writing got fucking weird. And this was after he was hugely famous internationally. He was world renowned. And his compositions then got weird. So he actually studied in Cologne, where I live, right here. And he died in Curtin, which is not far from me. It's a little town up in Norway. I have a student out there, actually, who I'm going to on Tuesday. It's a wee village, and he worked there. He also worked for a huge part of his life at the WDR, West Deutschfunk Radio. Which, yes, for those perceptive amongst you, the WDR, the same WDR that the Mouse and Mariana Buslechner work at from episode, whatever, 40 something it is, when Mariana was on talking about Spezi. I think it was called Spezi and Gold Flutes. So his compositions often reflect the punk style, I think, and have total disregard for any tradition or accepted convention. Total disregard for it. For example, he has a piece called Goldstaub, which means gold dust, and there's no score, and it just has the following directions. Be completely alone for 4 days, without food, in complete silence, without much movement, sleep as little as necessary, think as little as possible. After 4 days, late at night, without conversation beforehand, play single sounds, without thinking which you're playing. Close your eyes, just listen. That's what you do. That's the piece. That's the score. No notes, just do that. Now, of course, some fucking hippie musicians finally did actually record this piece at Stockhausen's house about 20 years ago. Spoiler alert, it's fucking shite. But still, a worldwide respected composer doing this at the peak of his powers is punk rock. To go down such a weird road, just didn't give a fuck about convention. And he had this. So another thing that's quite punk rock is he had this very vivid recreation of the Nazis murdering his mother. So he has an opera called Donnerstag aus Licht, which is mean like Thursday in the night. And so his mum, growing up, attempted suicide a few times. And she was admitted to hospital eventually for like a severe psychosis and possible schizophrenia. And then the Nazi party took power in Germany. And she came under the category of useless eaters, they called it now. Essentially, a useless eater was those in society that were deemed incurable for mental disorders and therefore were of no use to society. So the Stockhausen family were told she died of leukemia, but post-war, Karl-Heinz actually found out that she was shipped off to Hadamar, where she was gassed. Hadamar is one of the gassing facilities, so they basically said, oh no, she died of leukemia in bed last night, and then her and 89 other people were rounded up, sent on a train, dead. Just because she had schizophrenia. So, yeah. But he took this idea and was highly, highly graphic about it in this opera, which was highly controversial, especially in post-war Germany. At this time, Germany was not ready to see the Nazis murdering things. Karl-Heinz didn't give a fuck. Didn't give a single fuck. Now, on a lighter note, actually, I think before I get to that, I think he portrayed it as death by lethal injection. He didn't portray it as gassing, but still, it was graphic as fuck. Now, on a lighter note, he did write a piece called In Freundschaft, which is friendship. Freundschaft is friendship, for solo bassoon. A couple of you might have heard this. It's quite popular at like music college end of year recitals for bassoon players. It's actually a really cool piece. It's well written. It's weird. It's very modern music, but it's great. I'm a big fan of that kind of music, and it's very commonly performed still, because when he was writing the piece, he had a dream at the time about his childhood teddy bear, and so then post finishing it, he added an instruction to the piece to dress up like a teddy bear. So the performer must dress up like a teddy bear to perform this piece for solo bassoon. There are so many videos online, all these guys in onesies or girls in onesies, people in onesies. Gareth, come on, 2024, we just call them people these days. People in onesies dressed up as fucking teddy bears playing the bassoon, and the music doesn't fit the image because it's not light, gentle, happy music. It's not like the Teddy Bear's Picnic. It's like weird 12-tony kind of shit, but dressed up as a fucking teddy bear playing the bassoon. It's great. Is that punk rock? I think so. Again, total disregard for any kind of convention, doing whatever the fuck you want. And his disregard for societal norms, blah, 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 were very clear in his personal life too. So Stockhausen married his wife Doris in 1960, and they had 4 children. All of them were musicians, and his daughter Christelle was actually a very, very good and accomplished flute player who now lives in Norway. She has a Facebook page. Like, how fucking mad is that when I'm talking about composers' daughters? She's on Facebook. His daughter, Caroline Stockhausen's daughter, Christelle. But anyway, in 1967, he then meets a woman called Mary Begoymeister. And sure, what did him and Mary do? They moved in together with his wife, and they just had like one of those 3-way marriages. So him, Doris, and Mary just in there having a great time. So they all broke up in 1972 then, 5 years later. And then after that, what did Karl-Heinz do? Instead of getting a new girlfriend, he got 2 at the same time, Suzanne Stevens and Katinka Pasveer, and started another 3-way relationship, which actually lasted right up until his death. I love that dirty old dog, fucking Karl-Heinz. He's like, I don't subscribe to the outdated views of monogamy. Like, dead on, big man, we know what you're doing. I'm joking, by the way. Obviously I have total respect for polyamory. I don't give a fuck. Do what you want. Can't bring it with you. Doesn't bother me. Fill your boots, lads. Now, I should say, Katinka Pasveer, one of the people he's in a relationship with, is still a very good flute player. Like, a fucking amazing flute player. Played in quite a few famous orchestras back in Holland. Has done stuff with the Currentzis this year as well as the VDR. Lives around this area as far as I'm aware still. And it's the reason why there's so many Stockhausen flute works, either originals or previous works that he's now switched to flute and transcribed for flute. So I actually think Stockhausen deserves a podcast entirely of his own, because he is insanely cool, insanely interesting. I probably will have to mention the 9/11 thing, because if you googled Stockhausen, you're going to get the 9/11 thing. I forgot to put it in this podcast, but Stockhausen, don't quote me exactly on this, but it was something along the lines of he thought 9/11 was the greatest piece of performance art ever existed, and that 5,000 people had to take part in this piece of performance art, essentially dying, and blah blah blah. It was a very weird thing to say. I think he'd lost his fucking mind at this point, and he sort of backtracked a wee bit on it, but it was a very, very stupid and odd thing to say. I don't know what the fuck he was thinking at that time. But anyway, last thing on Mr. Stockhausen. I'm not glossing over that, by the way. If I'm going to talk about the 9/11 thing that Stockhausen said, I'm going to do it properly. Yeah, so I'm doing another episode, because I will do an episode on him because I fucking love him. But last thing, I don't love him because of the 9/11 thing. Fucking stop it, alright? It's a complicated issue. Leave me alone. I can hear you all fucking going, Gareth, leave me alone. Fuck off. Now, last thing. On the cover of the Beatles' Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band album, very famous album by the Beatles. If you haven't heard that, turn this fucking podcast off and go listen to the Beatles. Do it for your soul. But on the cover, there's a lot of famous people in this big group picture. One of them is Karl-Heinz Stockhausen. He's on it because the Beatles had a really experimental record called Revolution 9, and he was a big inspiration behind that, especially because of the recording techniques he was using at the time and his experimentation with the electronic music. They spoke on the phone a lot. Paul McCartney was good friends with him. So Stockhausen's on that album. Some man. Now, the last guy of my punk... Sorry, it is all guys. I tried my best to find a woman to balance out, and I will find one. Maybe I'll do an episode specifically on women punks in classical music, but for now, I'm just picking the people who I think are most extreme in this. So my last one, we're going modern times, we're getting properly like now. Someone you can go Google, someone who maybe even has an iPhone, properly relatable. My personal favourite conductor, one of my top 3 along with Miko Frank and Daniel Harding, is the Greek-born behemoth of a man, Theodor Currentzis. Now, a wee bit of background on Currentzis. He's just turned 52, so he's still a young fella, and he grew up in Greece before doing training further in Russia. He's had his own orchestras for quite a few years, and a few years ago he got a big job, like a major orchestral job as a conductor at the famous SWR or SWR Symphony Orchestra in Stuttgart. I talk about the WDR Symphony Orchestra here in Köln, massively famous orchestra. Stuttgart, SWR, it's the regional radio channel. Another massive orchestra, incredible orchestra, really like special. He's actually going to be stepping down from them though. He's been there for a few years. He'll be stepping down soon. Francois Xavier Roth was meant to be taken over, but now that he's been, he's been Me Too'd pretty hard. Francois, from what I've heard, apparently he's been sending pictures of his batting to people he shouldn't be sending pictures of his batting to. You shouldn't be sending pictures of your batting to anyone that doesn't ask for it. By the way, ask people if they want to see your batting first, and if they don't, keep your batting in your pants. But anyway, Currentzis has got like a cult following, like a proper cult following. I fucking adore him. Now, there's a few things that make him punk, so let's go through it. First of all, the clothes Currentzis wears. He wears whatever the fuck he wants. So usually, for years, he conducted all his major concerts in skinny jeans, a black t-shirt, and a big pair of boots with red laces on them. It was great. It was rock and roll as fuck. It looked great. He recently switched to tails, the proper penguin suit, or sometimes like an all black kind of stylish thing, which initially bothered me. He's like, oh fuck, he's so loud. But then I read why. So he said in an interview, he's like, I really despise the kind of artificial rules of the academic bourgeois. They don't speak the truth. People who go to concerts in their tails, they never wear these costumes in real life. I wear tails. I can go to the cafe in the morning in tails, but you have to wear something real on stage, not something artificial. It's not a bal masqué. It is a real treatment of life. Couldn't agree more. Prince used to do the same thing. Prince used to insist that all his background dancers, and when he was a prince in the revolution, that they had to stay in their performance clothes when they went for breakfast in the hotels. He said, no, it's real life. We do this. I love that. I respect that a lot. And I agree. Classical music, you shouldn't be wearing tails. This comes from the fucking 19th century where we all dress up like penguins. It's fucking stupid. It looks stupid. But anyway, the image he has isn't for show. It really is what he believes you should be doing. I relate to that. Now next, his style of conducting. Oh my God. As an actual conductor, go and listen to anything Currentzis has done. Anything. Just type his name into Spotify. Get any orchestra he's conducted. He's got a lot of albums out. One I love is the Tchaikovsky Concerto with Patricia Koptenskaya. Holy fuck. Tchaikovsky Violin Concerto. Because she's on maybe my favourite violin player. Unbelievable. But anyway, when you listen to it at Currentzis orchestra, the fortes are loud as they're deafening. They're loud as fuck. The pianos, you can barely hear them. They're so quiet. The tempos are so extreme. The bite in the orchestra, when you hear the start of attacks, even when he's doing things like Mozart, the start of the attacks has this fucking dirty, it's like you've sucked all the air out of it and you've just fucking went at it. It's vicious. It's amazing. It's wild. You've never heard anything like it. And he believes this is music. This is how music is meant to be. And he does blame recording, actually, for the sterilization of modern classical music. So he says, we know how the poets of the 19th century read their poems. It's screaming, it's ridden with blood. Les Fleurs du Mal by Baudelaire or Les Chants de Mal-d'Aurore by Ducasse were written with blood. It's not a position, it's not for academic people, you know. That was the approach of the author to this piece. This is then in the 20th century, also music. What did they do? They wanted to make recordings so I can read this book or I can listen to this music in a jacuzzi. So yes, classical music has become lounge music. Classical music is for relaxing. People will say, wow, Theodore is crazy. He makes big contrasts with too much pianissimo, too much fortissimo, fast tempo, and all of this. No, this is exactly how it was written. It was changed to fit the aesthetic of the time, of the 20th century, so that there's a sense of familiarity. But I'm not into making people feel comfortable. I need people to dream with me, not have vacations. So that's the difference, but I don't break any rules. So you can see, he has a clear disdain for the academic and the bourgeois approach to music, which in itself is so punk rock. That's one of the few things, one of the few people that went kind of anti-establishment in that sense, is open to it. Now, I do complain about a lot of punk rock classical musicians still belonging to the system, but at least Currentzis has tried to get away from it. Okay, so he started his own orchestras. He started two orchestras. The first one is Music Eterna, and the second one is the Utopia Orchestra. Both hand-picked players. Music Eterna, unbelievable. There's a video of them playing the Marriage of Figaro Overture on YouTube. Period instruments. Holy fuck. Holy fuck. You wouldn't believe what you're listening to. But talking about Utopia Orchestra, his new one, it says, Utopia is structurally, financially, and organizationally independent of any other collectives and institutions. In its substance, it is an idealistic attempt to find an approach to music creation which makes it possible to reach the inner essence of a musical text. So these orchestras are privately funded. They're not involved with any institutions or governments. They're privately funded by donors across Europe who believe in the idea. That's cool, away from the system. And they are drilled like fuck. They are the highest technical level. Like, they stand when they're performing as well, and nothing they do is less than 110%. Every gig is different. I adore both orchestras. I've never heard playing like that. I think, well, Irina Stachinskaya was principal flute for a long time in Music Eterna, and I think Hélène Bouleg played with them once or twice as well. A second flute, the Irina, which is like a dream team, Jesus Christ. They're so good, the orchestras. Watch the video of the Figaro Overture by Music Eterna. Fucking the bite to the sound. Now, after all this, it does seem like Theodor Currentzis is our saviour of classical music. The true self-proclaimed anarchist. And he's the guy we all need to shake up the industry. But as always, there's a small issue. And in this case, it is Mother Russia. Because Currentzis spends most of his time split between Russia and Europe, East and West. Obviously, right now, that's a particularly delicate thing following the invasion of Ukraine a few years ago. So, for example, we've seen a lot of Russian artists not come back to Europe since then. Gergiev's done, thank fuck it, most overrated conductor in the world anyway. But quick disclaimer, or something important to note, not a disclaimer, something important to note is, if you're in Russia and you're in the public eye, so you're an artist or a performer that is in the public eye, it is very hard to be anti-Putin. So what I will say is, silence doesn't always mean complicity, because you'll never know what happens to you if you speak out against Putin in Russia. You end up like your man Litvinenko. So just because you don't speak out about it does not necessarily mean complicity, because your safety is highly threatened from what I understand. But Currentzis has been silent on the issue of Russia. Been silent. No comments, no hints, which for an anarchist hippie is quite a surprise and not really in his brand MO. Even when he went to Russia years ago to study, he did put his reason, and his reasons back then were committed. He said, going to Russia was a form of punk resistance. I started going to the Eastern Bloc because the resistance was there. I'd been in dangerous places when there were shootings and things like that. Different kinds of difficult places. Russia was one of the most difficult places at that time. It was super difficult to go. You would have had to be a kind of lunatic to try and find happiness there. But I went to find happiness there, and I found it. Because absolute romanticism, when you have nothing to give, nothing to do, but you're all at the best parties and you have the best connections, and it's about art, it's about poetry, it's about dreams. And every day of your life is a performance. It was that. Which is very cool. But, so, anyway, the Ukrainian conductor Oksana Linev, which was the first ever woman to product a new production of the opening of the Wagner Festival, Bayreuth, no fucking mean feat, huge achievement. She refused to play at the Vienna Festival in 2024 because Currentzis was also scheduled. So she was conducting a Ukrainian orchestra as well. I think it was the Kiev Players or something. And she wouldn't let her musicians be on the same program as Currentzis. It says a lot. Now, Currentzis, through his PR and his teams and stuff, has made some kind of statement saying he doesn't comment on other worldly affairs. I don't know. I don't really know, to be honest. Is he being silenced? Or does he just love those Russian rubles a bit too much? We don't know. We don't know. So it's something I'm not very happy with. I wish he would comment on it. So until then, that's the negative to Theodor Currentzis. If that gets solved, we could be alright. But we'll see. So if anyone knows him, tell him he's more than welcome on the podcast whenever you want. I won't even make him drink vodka. He can drink whatever he wants. So anyway, lads, there we are. That's my 3 actual punks of the classical music world. Real ones, not your fucking classic FM watered down bollocks that you get. Can classical music ever really be anti-establishment or anti-authoritarian? Is elitism too deeply ingrained in classical music to ever get rid of it? I don't know. Let me know what you think. So I'll be back next week with a hopefully interesting hot take on classical music and what's going on. Until then, look after yourselves. Have a lovely weekend. I hope lots of you are watching the football if it's still on. And have a great time. Big smooches. I love you all.